Syril Karn is one of the most relatable characters I've ever seen in Star Wars to date. Not so much in, that the actions of what he's doing are good, but in the fact that he is doing them, and the complicated and nuanced reasons as to why he is doing those actions, even though they are for an evil organization. And I think a lot of people missed said nuances, mainly because they are never stated. It's just as much about what isn't said as what is said. It's what's left unsaid, often visualized either by the actor or the brilliant and simple use of the camera. I've seen a lot of reviewers bash Karn as nothing more than an incel or a 30-year-old virgin. Well, I can't prove that he's not a virgin, but I can definitively argue that Karn is anything but an incel. Sure, he's socially awkward, and he's a bit of a loner, and, he feels socially isolated from most other people, but an incel would never do half of what Karn tries to achieve throughout ANDOR. Now, in this video, I will be discussing topics which are certainly controversial, which is what the creators of ANDOR wanted to do from the beginning, so good for them. But what I'm discussing in no way reflects my own personal opinions on the subject of fascism and masculinity. Instead, I am merely discussing some of the historical contexts to help explain why such a terrible method became so widely embraced by millions of people. With that disclaimer, let's begin. Karn is clearly a lost soul. We can see why after his inciting incident. His mother is probably the reason why he has a majority of the issues that he has. She's clearly overly controlling and watches over him like a hawk. I have no doubt she loves him and loves him dearly, but that overprotectiveness only is going to alienate Karn further away from her, and that's exactly what happens. This plays into the fact that I can't find him an incel either. An incel would probably just stay at home. He would be content with his lowly place within society. But that's not Karn. At every opportunity, both before and after his first encounter with Cassian, Karn is looking to better himself and ensure that proper justice is brought to the two men Cassian murdered. And part of this also screams ambition underneath all of that. So this can also counter the argument that Karn is a spoiled brat. After all, he appears to be an only child, which probably plays into why his mother's overprotectiveness is there to begin with. However, a spoiled child would expect a job to be handed to him, or justice to be served on its own. But that's not what Karn does. A spoiled man would never actively seek ways to get himself back up the social totem pole. A spoiled man would not actively look for any means to escape his mother's home on Coruscant. Sure, Karn goes about it in admittedly a creepy way, and I do fault the writing for this. I would have toned that down considerably. But in this, I do not see Karn as an incel or as spoiled. I see a simple man convinced in the ideas behind the Empire, and those are order and justice. It's just kind of ironic that Karn has to break the rules and create a bit of hierarchical chaos in order to do it. Which that kind of brings up the next question in all this. Could Karn actually make a good rebel? Now, there's a lot of talk about Karn and that he acts more like a rebel than he actually does an Imperial soldier. And in that, I actually agree. He openly lies to gather information on Cassian. He actively follows and even stalks dedra Meero. He even goes behind the commander's orders in the hopes of finding Cassian and bring justice to the two men Cassian killed in the first episode. Those all sound more in line with rebel mentality than that of an Imperial officer, or even a wannabe Imperial officer. This brings me to my next point, then, why I like Karn so much, in that I don't think he's actually a bad man. I don't think he's bad whatsoever. I truly think he believes in what he's doing, and he believes in the Empire's cause to restore order to the galaxy. I think he's a man who has felt lost his entire life, perhaps even alienated, and he sees the constant Imperial propaganda and buys into it mainly because it offers him stability, order, and the opportunity to be a part of something larger than himself. What's interesting is that Karn is clearly idolizing the Empire, not for its reality, but for its ideal. In reality, Meero is far more in tune with the ugly underbelly the Empire uses to obtain its resources, its technology, and how they maintain order in their specific regions. Karn grew up only seeing the good stuff, the stuff the Empire as an entity wants people to see. Only his experiences on Preox open his eyes to the cracks within the Imperial system. He sees the corruption on a micro level. Chief Inspector Hein explaining that the deaths of those 2 security officers, well, that was just in a fight, and not a blatant murder by Cassian Andor. What happens next reaffirms a lot of what Karn believes. He finds Sergeant Mosk and other like-minded individuals who hold the same or similar ideals about the Empire as he does. Quite frankly, they're naive. These aren't insiders at ISB like Meero. They only just scratched the surface of the corruption and the backhandedness which plagues the Empire and would eventually lead to its downfall. That naivete brings these men into something way over their heads, and well, we get the show because of it. But revealing this corruption does not make Karn more sympathetic towards the rebellion, but instead the opposite. He sees it as a sieve that needs removing, and he begins obsessing over Cassian and the wanting to return to active duty in order to obtain those goals. But why do people like Karn exist in the first place? Isn't it obvious that the Empire is evil? Well, yes, especially as the rebellion grew, but you need to look at the in-world context in which the Empire grew from. There was total chaos, the Republic was failing, the Clone Wars was in full swing, the economy was in ruins. Suddenly the Empire forms, and at least on Coruscant, order is indeed restored. This is where the appeal of fascism comes into play. Now, I did a research article a while back exploring this topic and how fascism appealed to so many people within the 1920s and the 1930s. Roger Griffin refers to interwar fascism as, quote, the product of a crisis of capitalism threatened from within by the breakdown of the financial, social, and political structures which maintained it, and from without by revolutionary socialism. Well, in context of the Empire and in Star Wars, there wasn't a socialist movement, but there was the chaos of the Clone Wars itself and the alien entities within the separatist movement. Such ideologies require firm leadership. People looked to a leader for salvation, a messiah-like figure, creating a quote-unquote cult of personality, a cult within the realms of said leader. To a fascist, their motto, in essence, will boil down to believe, obey, fight. In their attempts to unite the people, fascists often use symbolism to help give themselves a divine purpose. Fascists became great at using religious icons and icons in general to back their vision of their nation being sacred. In the case of Star Wars, the Empire formed out of the idea that the Republic was the sacred entity, and it revolved around that idea. Ironically, those same people also actively sought its destruction. Fascist ideologies rallied their people behind the notion that their country is all high, and its people were what the populace wanted to believe in, and therefore must believe in. It goes into the fascisti, the symbol of fascism itself, a bundle of sticks wrapped together. Separated we are weak, together we are strong. This sense of order and emphasis on iconology helped capture the youth, particularly young males. Nazism in particular was excellent at capturing the youth and indoctrinating them into their ideology. Boys flocked to National Socialism when joining the Sturmabteilung or the Sturmstaffel. The SS, ladies and gentlemen, it's the SS. The Nazis counted on male chauvinism, or the notion of men being the fighters, the heroes, the creators. Fascism utilizes masculinity to project the perfect man, an idea to believe in and ultimately fight for. Again, this brings to light believe, obey, fight. Often the Nazis would use arts and literature to express being a community and being of one culture, which feeds into this ideal. Suddenly, with some of this context in mind, it makes sense why so many young men flocked to fascism with the hopes of belonging to something, to be a part of something. Even if they did not necessarily understand the nuances the party stood for, anyone could grasp the uniforms, the order, the camaraderie of being side by side with your fellow man. They could grasp a hold of all of that. And I think so many people overlook this symbolic side of fascism and write off all those party members as just being evil, as many of them became. But the truth is, it's much worse than that, and scarier than that as well. Most of these people were just like you and I. They were not cartoon villains to start off with. They were neither evil nor good. They were just people swept into the pomp and circumstances. That sounds an awful lot like the Empire within Star Wars, doesn't it? And Karn's journey thus far. He's a loner, lost and alienated with the world around him, and then he sees an organization which offers uniformity, stability, order, and the ever-powerful notion of being a part of something larger than oneself. The Empire, even if it's only for a corporate tactical force, offered Karn everything he was yearning for his entire life. It even provided a place to help cultivate his ambitions, like tailoring his uniform to fit better. It got him away from his home and a place to implement the ideals he so idolized growing up. And we know he idolized the Empire from a young age because of those little action figures in his room. That's no different than you or I playing with our little plastic army men outside when we were really little, or a young boy playing with tin soldiers in 1920s Germany. Karn can literally be any of us. There will always be times where we feel alienated from our society or ourselves, and yearn to be a part of something greater, something beyond ourselves as an individual. It's only natural for any man to crave this almost on a primal level. That need for stability, that need for belonging, that need to fight for something you genuinely believe in. Karn is not content with working behind a desk in a meaningless job like so many of us are currently doing. That meaningless job only fuels that yearning to join something bigger, to embrace an idea or a code. Why work this meaningless job when you can join the Fascist Party or the Empire and not just belong to something, but actively be a part of a greater movement? Big air quotes there, but you get the point. And that's what's so terrifying about fascism and by extent the Empire within Star Wars. An evil ideology corrupted those yearnings and used it to corrupt generations of regular people. It turned lawyers into monsters, doctors into barbarians, train operators into assembly line mass murderers, all for a relatable yearning to belong to something larger than yourself. And that is why Karn is so relatable. He could literally be any of us. I do think it's important to understand why people embrace fascism the way they did, because it helps establish just how scary and evil that ideology actually is. And that's partially why I was fascinated with ANDOR in general. I thought it did a great job at capturing just how utterly terrifying fascism can be, but also help explain why so many people like Karn or Meero are so attracted to it. It's very nuanced, and I highly appreciate the show for doing that. Anyways, this is part 2 of my ANDOR videos. There might be some more, I don't know. Depends on what I feel like talking about. Thank you all for watching or listening. And in the end, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying sayonara.